I look. We need points in it. I don't.
No, you didn't.
I don't mean this maliciously, but the word. Sorry, I'm sorry. Look, we need points. I
definitely didn't.
Guys, come on.
Counter-narrative news with a bit of a commentary on this recent spat of KSI and his Sidemen team choosing to use the P word, the derogative racist slur, against, well, all people of colour, but particularly targeted at what people conceive or vaguely conceive to be Asian or South Asian. It's the PAKI word. Just a few comments on the word itself. Now, there's a country in South Asia that was formed in 1947 as a result of British colonial partition of the subcontinent to ensure that it's weak going forward, and it's just consumed by a colonial division, which it has been consumed by that colonial division until today from 1947, and that's the state of Pakistan. Stan means land, and Paki means pure, or well done, or the right thing, or it's a complete thing, or it's a wonderful thing. It actually entered into Cockney slang, which is a working class vernacular, localized kind of way of speaking in and around East London. It's based. Pucker comes from Paki, and pucker is what the word originally means in South Asian languages, particularly Hindustani and Urdu and Punjabi, etc., probably Kashmiri as well. It means pucker. It means that's wonderful, that's great, that's excellent. You know, there's a famous brand of London pies called pucker pies. So everyone, it's a well-known term. So it's not narrowly a racist slur, but of course it is also a racist slur, and that's the complexity of language. And there's a community of white supremacist racists out there, and non-white people who adopt the same type of consciousness and racist behavior, in which they say, well, hold on a second, it literally just means pure or good, therefore it's not a racial slur. Well, it is a racial slur as well. Or some people saying, oh, well, Asians call it themselves, as similar racist argument. Well, black people use the N-words amongst themselves, therefore, well, no, it's still a racist slur. You know, whatever type of person chooses to use it, it's kind of not relevant. It's still a racist slur, and it's no one has a license to use racist slurs against anyone. So coming to the word in itself, in the way it's used as a racist slur, when people are attacked verbally with racist language, there's no great Chinese wall between oppressed racialized peoples. The P word has been used against, obviously, discernibly South Asian people. But South Asian people, some of them can look like they're from different parts of the Middle East and Central Asia, Far East Asia, even East Africa. So the P word has and continues to be used by racists, anyone that they consider outside of whiteness. So, for example, East African people, Somali people, have been and continue to be called the P word by white people and non-white people, because in this framework of white supremacy, to some East Africans don't, quote unquote, look African or look black because of their phenotype, the way they look, the shape of their face, the nature of their hair. And of course they're not monolithic in East Africa. There's a great diversity of the people of the East African region and Somali people like there is of any region of any continent on the planet. But the point is that the P word is not just used against Asian people. It's used much wider and further than that, including also African heritage people and African Caribbean people. Of course, African Caribbean people often, not always, but often are from mixed heritages themselves, even if they don't, it's not obvious and apparent, or they may not even articulate it publicly themselves. But many of them are from mixed heritage, including Chinese and other Asian heritage, including Indian as well, particularly in places like Guyana and Trinidad and other places, but also in Jamaica and the other islands. It's a really important point in this regards, because and it's also a result of white supremacist divide and rule, that, okay, the P word is used against Asians, therefore I'm not Asian, but I'm racialized, therefore it's not really my business, or I don't really have to treat it as if I was called something that I would feel more directly racistly against myself. It doesn't work that way. And racism and racists and the racist state sees all non-white people outside of the sphere of humanity. They're otherized. Of course, there's even a hierarchy of treating people as subhuman, as less than human, and that's to do with complex things. It can be related to the quote-unquote shade of one's skin, how one is quote-unquote lighter or darker, or what's essentialized as a European phenotype. I mean, it's very complicated. But basically, one has to treat the P word just as the N word or any kind of racialized slur. If we don't fight back collectively in a united way against any given racial slur, then another racial slur has a pass in this sense. And this is where it becomes interesting with KSI and his team. So KSI is the most influential social media personality for young people in Britain from around under the age of 25 years old. He made his name and his career out of commentaries of online gaming. He's also professional, involved in professional fights and organizing that as well, which is just it's very fascinating, UFC and MMA competitions and boxing and all of this. But there's also just a very racist, animalistic, the most depraved spectacle of paying working class young people who have no real career prospects and given a chance by this capitalist racist society to then go into an arena and beat each other to a pulp and bloody each other. Often, people get killed, and you can easily be killed. People get killed by one punch, and then people are cheering on, and it's just a sordid, disgusting thing. Although, obviously, the level of psychological combativeness, discipline, strength, or vulnerability, and physically as well, is fascinating. It's still very exploitative. But anyway, so KSI has made his money out of these things, and with his quote-unquote Sidemen company and team, he's branched off into selling vodka. They started a takeaway business. They're going to open a physical restaurant at Wembley Park. So that's important if people want to protest against these people. Ensure that shop never opens, and it's boycotted and it's shut down by any means necessary. So KSI is very much a phenomenon of modern social media, with all of its grift and manipulation and desperation and chasing social media traction and subscribers and monetizing that, and the superficiality of it all, the alienation that it also represents between people, all of this. So KSI is well in all of that. Also, there's another interesting thing here, that there's, for several years, he's been accused of sexual harassment of young women, and this has been going around in quite a widespread way in social media, and it's come up again because of the P word controversy. So anyway, so KSI is on a TV show with his Sidemen group. It's some word game that they're playing, and he decides to choose this word. He chooses this word, and it's a big laugh in the studio around it. This has echoes of when Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon was hosted by a black podcaster, and Brother Raspect was also on the show, and then the podcast host, who happens to be a black man, uses the P word, and Stephen Yaxley Lennon bursts out in great laughter, and Raspect is having a bit of a giggle on the side as well. And it's a really low, depressing, sad, disappointing, demoralizing moment there. But then none of this would be particularly significant if it wasn't for the fact of what the British state and government is doing right now and has been engaged in. Now, the far-right Tory regime has in the last couple of days re-established a position which was historically for the last decade or so the position of the far right outside of the government at the grassroots, of things like the English Defence League, who are trying to put out the notion, which has been disproved again and again and again, that somehow the sexual exploitation of young white girls in this country is predominantly conducted by gangs, basically, of Muslim men from Pakistani backgrounds. So it's the Muslim grooming gangs, quote-unquote, racist trope. There's there's organised sexual abuse of women and girls and boys and men. That's done by, mostly organised groups of abusive men, and it's quite universal. It's not really, particularly, it's not attributed to one racialized group or another, but it's been weaponized in this racist way to divide people in a racist way and attack Muslims in general and Asian people in general. But the way it's instrumentalizes around the access of the Pakistani man, yeah. So it's anti-Muslim, anti-Islamophobic, etc. So the Tory Home Secretary Suella Braverman raises this issue again in the last couple of days, in the last 48 hours. It's Pakistani grooming gangs. Rishi Sunak chimes in as well, basically in agreement in going after the quote-unquote grooming gangs as well. And the Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, on a radio show also boasts about how he, when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, sent to jail grooming gangs, and that's code for Pakistanis, basically. So he joined into that whole racist posture. So that's why this comment, this flippant kind of way in which KSI and his colleagues use the P word, has been so deeply problematic and depressing. It has obviously created a response from Asian heritage and particularly Pakistani heritage people, which is good. They've pushed back and they've critiqued it online. But the damage is done. The video is out there. It's for everyone to see. And it just constantly deepens and pushes forward this white supremacy. And because KSI is a black young man of West African heritage, it plays again into that whole old colonial white supremacist divide of rule. They're one of their main strategies of dividing oppressed people is dividing them according to one group is Asian and one group is African, one group is brown, one group is black, and they just can't mix, they just can't get along. That's the white supremacist strategy and approach to ensure that. Of course, these two groups have united many times, and there is still some level of unity, although that's gone down because of the successes of racism and the far right. The far right is centre ground, and that's why we have this incident where KSI feels that him and his colleagues can be comfortable enough to behave in this racist manner, and it's just extremely depressing. And does the Pakistani community, the working class Pakistani community in this country, does it even have an ability to politically push back on this racism? No, it doesn't. Like every racially oppressed group, they have next to nothing. We have no ability to assert our interests as racialized, oppressed, working class communities. Actually, we're more divided, we're more oppressed, we're more immiserated, we're more impoverished on every level that you can think of. Every single aspect of social, cultural life. We are attacked increasingly, including the Pakistani community, who, by the way, also have disproportionate levels of failure systemically through the education system, housing, employment, etc. So it's an easy target. They have no ability to push back, and there is no real pushback. In actuality, yes, social media, tweets, and Instagram stories, and blah blah blah, all of this stuff. It's not real. It's literally virtual. Literally, it doesn't actually exist. What actually exists is humans in real life, in communities, in real buildings, gathering together and making demands. That's absent at the moment in society. It's become absent. And the anti-racist movement there is no anti-racist movement as such, because an anti-racist movement is the ability of a social movement to somehow determine the way history is navigated and how history rolls on. And that is not happening currently. So of course KSI and his Sidemen team, having then realized post the incident of having a good laugh about the P word in that studio, in that video moment, seeing the backlash, seeing basically, that their followers might dip, that their income might contract, have issued just what comes across as a totally disingenuous, dishonest, just fake apology, just the most fakest of fake, posturing, unbelievable, pathetic excuses for what passes as an apology. We would like to advocate that that whole team just doesn't ever get away with it. That anywhere that they try to raise their heads, anywhere they try to gain traction on social media and make money out of anything, that it's preemptively, ideally, shut down definitively and totally. Many thanks.